Welcome to True Crime by Indie Drop-In. Each week we feature an episode from the best independent creators. Hit subscribe for more great true crime content. Hello, true crime fans. This is Greg with Indie Drop-In. Before we get started, I just wanted to tell you really quick about another Indie Drop-In show, Scary Time. It's getting to be that time of year, and I know you're going to love a great scary podcast. Each week, you'll hear an independent creator tell us about the paranormal, ghosts, monsters, hauntings, creepy places, enchanted objects, aliens, and so much more. Just search for Scary Time in any podcast app, or I'll put a link in the show notes so that you can check it out, if you dare. Thanks. Today's episode is from Murderous Roots. Murderous Roots is a true crime with a familial twist. If you enjoyed this episode from Murderous Roots, don't forget to check the show notes for links to subscribe and follow on social media. Enjoy the show.
Begin.
Welcome to Murderous Roots, a podcast that explores the family history of killers. I'm Denise, and with me is Zelda. Now, let's get started. Well, hi there, Zelda.
Oh my gosh, Denise, it's so good to see you again. How's your week?
It's been busy. You know, the kids are home.
Good.
And crazy.
Keeps you off the streets.
Something has to. Yeah. At least that's what my husband believes. He likes to call me a troublemaker, but I know it's the quiet ones that are the troublemakers.
Oh, yes, for sure. For sure.
So.
But you know what happened since the last time we talked?
No, what?
I bought a car.
Woo!
I know. I'm feeling very fancy.
I think that came up on the last episode that we just talked about.
Oh, you know, you're probably right. I have to tell you, my brain has been such oatmeal this week, just with everything going on.
I understand. So I'll just cut that part out. So
awesome.
No big deal.
It's all good. Or leave it in. People should know, you know.
Okay.
At our very best, we're still.
How about we try this? Have you had a chance to go and drive your car around the city?
I have actually grocery shopping today. And I know, right? It's like, but the life I lead is so glamorous. But it was fun to just go on my own without having to make any arrangements and walk into the store and not have to worry about anybody waiting on me or how I was going to get home. And it was lovely. So,
and it must be fun with this new vehicle because we talked about it last time to be able to park in your actual parking spot.
Yes.
That you had for a few years. Is it a year now?
Two years. Going on 3. Wow. I've been there a while.
I know.
But yeah, it's, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. So I am sad actually now that it's like, oh, now that my life's getting back to normal, I'm leaving. But okay. So
by the time this airs, the stuff with me going on will be over. But my girls are getting ready to go on a 2-week trip with their grandparents.
Fun.
And we ran into some issues.
Oh, no.
And I will say the company name. I'm not shy. I've told them what I thought. Avis Rental Car. So my dad arranged to rent a 12-passenger vehicle, like a Ford Transit, months ago because they've been planning this trip for months. And then he got a phone call early last week saying, you know what? We're not going to have that vehicle for you after all.
Wow.
Yeah, that didn't go over well. I tried to reach Avis. My parents tried to reach them. They just said, oh, we're just sorry. They're just in demand. And I'm like, but if you book, shouldn't you give priority to the person who's booked months out and stop this BS of like double booking? And I hate that. But here's the good news. So at first they were looking for another one. And of course, everybody's upcharging now because the demand got higher. So it was going to cost them double, if not more. I mean, I found one that they could rent and it was going to be $4,400 for that time.
Wow. 2 weeks.
You could almost basically buy a used one and then sell it back and still pay less.
Although that's not a bad idea, actually.
No, it really isn't. Especially since they're in such high demand. So they contacted a different Avis and they were told, oh, we'll have it. But, you know, things might happen. So that left my family feeling a little uncomfortable. My sister and I are desperate to get rid of the kids for a couple of weeks at this point. We love our kids, but we want a break. And we did everything in our power. And I happened to find a place not far from me because when they're doing the trip, they're going to drive up to my house. Mm-hmm. Then they were going to get the van up here and then continue on. And I found a place not far from me that it's a local business. And they're like, well, we might have one. Let us look. We'll get back to you in a couple days and whatever. And they did. And It's going to cost less than what that backup vehicle was. A little bit more than the original price they got. But we've learned a lesson from this. If you're renting a specialty vehicle, go with a local business, not one of those chain rental agencies. You can't trust them.
Yeah. Yeah. And right now, I mean, rental cars are just horrifically expensive. And, of course, with the kind of work I do, we all travel a lot. And, the reports we're getting back from some of the cities is that they're, quadruple 5 and 6 times what they normally are. So, and of course, when you're there in business, you have to pay it because, you need the car and you need to conduct your business. But it is astonishing to me how much they're price gouging right now.
It's insane. And I think part of the problem coming up with some of like these vehicles, like the vans, because it was hard to find a van that was available, is that a lot of people, even though people are getting vaccinated and everything, they don't necessarily want to get in a tuna can called a plane to travel. So you have a lot more people traveling by driving and doing these driving adventures. Because we even looked into RVs. I mean, that's a whole different racket there.
Yeah.
People are renting out their own RVs, but this is like, I mean, I was laughing so hard going, you got to be kidding me, when I discovered they were charging per mile if you went over 100 miles in a day.
Wow.
There was one RV, a couple of people who were doing that if you went over 50 miles in a day. I'm like, what's the point of having an RV if you're limiting it to 100 miles? It seems a little suspect and ridiculous to me, but there you go. What do I know? But it's all worked out. We're excited. My girls are thrilled. So
that'll be so much fun.
Yeah, I can't wait. We should probably get back into.
Oh yeah, that's right. There's death to discuss.
Yes, we have death to discuss. So we'll start that. So this is another mini-sode, but it might end up being longer than a mini-sode. Because I realized there was more there than I knew. And then I ran into a few things that had me going, what's going on here? And I had to dig in a little deeper and found all sorts of interesting details. So this might be more like a regular episode, but that's not so awful, right?
Yeah. We'll see if they stick with us.
Yeah, hopefully, because this one's a good one. And this came about because of our episode on Belle Starr. And I said it at the time, and I said, oh, we'll have to do a mini-sode on him because I discovered one of the suspects in her murder was a serial killer.
Dun, dun, dun.
By the name of Edgar A. Watson, or in some cases, Edgar J., because he changed his middle initial at some point, and nobody knows why.
Curiouser and curiouser.
He is. So what do you have for us?
Well, I have to tell you, this whole story was just crazy town. It was crazy town. And so, as you mentioned, he came to our attention because he was the potential murderer of Belle Starr. At that point, he was known as Bloody Ed. That was a nice little nickname. Okay. And oddly enough, he killed her over a land lease dispute, allegedly, of course. And then he killed some other people over kind of the same issue, which I thought was, odd. Apparently he has a thing for being part of the landed gentry. So now Ed was the firstborn of Liege and Minnie Watson. And the date I found for his birth was November 11th, 1855, and born in South Carolina.
And that's true. But his mom was not Minnie Watson, was it?
I had that it was Minnie Watson, and then their daughter was also named Minnie Watson.
Oh, it probably is. I'm sorry. I probably got confused.
No worries. When Ed was still a kid and not yet known as Bloody Ed, his mom ran away from his abusive asshat of a dad, taking Ed and his little sister, also Minnie, with her, where they lived with relatives in Florida. And as far as I can tell, these Minnies were never murdered. So they bucked the odds because Minnies tend to die. So,
yes, which we've learned and we discussed.
We have learned. Now, sadly, Ed did grow up to be an even bigger, genuinely evil dude than his dad. Now, he married several times and had several children and eventually abandoned all of them. He was a handsome devil, tall, red hair, blue eyes, and apparently really personable when he wasn't trying to kill you. So now Ed spent much of his life flitting around. Obviously, born in South Carolina, moved to Florida as a child. As an early 20-something, he got bored and he left for Arkansas and then Oklahoma, where he was up to some pretty shady stuff, and eventually likely, but only allegedly, killed Belle Starr, which meant he then had to run away again. Now,
of course,
exactly when all his crimes occurred seems kind of flexible because there's various dates claimed for things like general thievery and horse stealing. And, you know, when he was back in Florida, he slashed a man's throat in a barroom brawl. The man lived, but Ed had to pay a small fortune to get out from under the charges. And then, because he can't seemingly help himself, he killed a man in Arcadia, ran to relatives in Lake City, where he shot a man, had to run again, this time to the Florida Keys. He was never actually charged with any murders, though.
No.
Crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, he had some money, though. That could be part of it.
He did. Yeah, he absolutely did. Now, and he probably had information on people who needed that information being kept quiet.
True.
Now, of course, back in the day, the Keys were where folks went who didn't want to be found. There wasn't much actual law there, and Ed took full advantage of that. So when he first got there, he worked around the Everglades for about 10 years, doing God knows what, but eventually got together enough money to start a 40-acre farm, Chatham Bend Key, in the early 1900s, growing sugarcane and vegetables for the New York market. Now, his products were popular, and he did really well for himself. So he probably could have lived a nice life for himself just doing the farming. But, you know, that's not our boy, is it? So
No.
He also distilled and sold bootleg rum. He kept buying more acreage to expand his farm, which isn't illegal, but how he got his money was a little sketch. And he would boat around the beaches of Florida getting cheap labor and running stolen goods. Now, how did he get such a good deal on farm workers, you might ask? Easy breezy. He refused to pay them, and when they got a little bit bothersome about it, he killed them and disposed of their bodies. I know, right? It's like...
It's one of the worst I think we've come across. I mean...
Yeah, just the cold, calculated nature of how he killed, because he didn't have to be mad at you. You just had to be in his way, you know?
Right.
And they found, after he died, they found about 50 bodies on his farm. Yep. And they feel that he actually killed quite a few more people than that, given how much farm labor was involved and how he never paid any of his farm labor. So he probably dumped others in the ocean, as one does.
Oh, yeah.
So he also killed 2 men who were squatting on some property he'd just purchased. Literally, they said to him, "We'll leave once we harvest our crops." And Ed said, "Hell no," and killed them and got to keep their crops too.
So he had an issue with patience.
Yeah, apparently. He gave redheads a really bad name. Like,
he is the definition of what people think redheads are.
Like a terrible stereotype, right?
Yeah.
Oh.
It's awful stereotype. They're not usually that bad.
Horrible human being. Horrible.
Mm-hmm.
So about this time, Ed's neighbors are getting a little wound up about this bloody Ed guy, but the sheriff wouldn't do anything about him because their county didn't actually have a sheriff. And the one from the county over was all, not my circus, not my monkeys, much like sheriffs today.
Yeah, it hasn't changed a whole lot.
Oh, no. Well, the final straw came when several people hanging out at Ed's house, ruffians all, killed some of their own band of misfits, including an older woman by the name of Hannah Smith, a well-known local alligator hunter.
She sounds cool.
She kind of does. And she was 6 feet tall and apparently quite large. So I feel like she and I were kindred spirits.
Yes.
When the neighbors found her body buried in a shallow grave, they got all, "What cannot be defended must be avenged." And they had enough for bloody Ed and waited at the boat landing at Chokoloskee for him to return. When Ed saw the crowd meant to strong-arm him to get him to the law, he tried to shoot them because that's how Ed does things.
Well, in this case, it was a little bit of self-defense to a degree.
Well, alas, his gunpowder was wet. It didn't fire, and he was gunned down before he could reach for his pistol. And then, because they were a little irritated with the man, they dragged his body behind a boat, eventually burying him in a shallow grave with a rope tied from his neck and the rope looped around a tree. when his wife was informed where he was buried, literally told, he's in this area, look for the rope. She reportedly said, just bring me his watch. The sheriff did come down to Chokoloskee after that, took a number of the residents back to Fort Myers for court session, a little bit of an inquest, but nothing came of it. Sometimes people are just like, man needed killing. So,
which is true.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes, if you can't contain it, there aren't a lot of choices. Now, it seems like all his kids did not actually take after their dad, but Denise will know more about that. They seem to have grown up to be good citizens, no doubt thanks to their long-suffering mothers.
Oh, they did suffer. And you might have said this, did you mention how he would sometimes take in people who were trying to run from the laws as workers as well?
I didn't mention that. I just kind of figured that was a given, but yeah.
Or about the hurricane?
The hurricane is, when they found the bodies. Yeah.
Yeah. That was fabulous, Miss Zelda. And so we want to learn about his family. Or do we?
Yeah, seriously.
So let's first start with his name. His name was Edgar Artemus Watson. But for some reason, it was after he left Oklahoma and Arkansas area, he changed it to Edgar J. Watson. I have no idea what the J stood for, but he would show up as Edgar J. in documents and stuff after that point. But it was the same guy. It was very weird. So who was he? Where did he come from? What brought this temper to him? We may never have all the answers, but we have some clues. You talked a little bit about his father. I'm going to go a little bit further back to start. There is evidence that his second great-grandfather was Revolutionary War captain for the South Carolina militia, Michael Watson, a soldier who actually died while battling the British.
Wow.
Captain Watson had led his mountain militia with a Captain William Butler, and they learned of a loyalist camp in Dean's Swamp near Orangeboro, South Carolina. And they headed there hoping, they decided to go there quickly in haste around sunset, thinking that they could surprise the loyalists. What Captains Watson and Butler didn't know was that the loyalists had been warned by a captured man who had escaped. So, to their surprise, they were ambushed when they arrived, and several patriots died at the site of the battle. Captain Michael Watson did survive the battle, but he was seriously wounded and he was removed. Now, they're not sure if he was removed to the camp that we're at or if he might have been returned to his home. But soon after he arrived, he died on May 26, 1782, at the age of 56.
Wow.
His wife was Martha Watson, a mere 20 years his junior, and his first cousin.
Well, they did those sorts of things.
Yes, but that might be a clue you never know. Now, his grandson was Artemus, and he was the son of Elijah Sr. and the grandfather of Edgar. And he was born in 1801, but he lived a very short life, dying at age 40, leaving his children orphans as their mother, Lucretia Daniel, had died 4 years previously at the age of 29. Naturally, the children were dispersed amongst family and friends, and I can only imagine the difficulty and challenges and anger this may have inspired, especially during the antebellum South in a slave-owning family, where if you're angry, you have a place and a person to unleash your anger at that's accepted, sadly. Because let's be clear, Edgar's father, Elijah Daniel, son of Artemus, was not a kind man. He was known to be violent and volatile. But we'll come back to that in a bit. First, let's talk about Edgar's mom's line. Now, you said Minnie, and I never saw Minnie, and it could be that I just skipped over it, but that's not the name I have for her. So Edgar's mother is a bit of a mystery. I say this because while someone on Find a Grave made a connection to certain people as her parents, I cannot make that connection. So let me explain. Edgar's father, Elijah, married Ellen Catherine Addison on January 25th, 1855 in Edgefield County, South Carolina. This isn't that far from the capital of South Carolina. So just so you know, if you're curious, where's that? There was a prominent Addison family in Edgefield at the time of her birth in 1830. The Captain Allen Bartlett Addison family. Now, Allen was a planter with a large plantation with over 65 enslaved individuals in 1840. Then, based on his will in 1850, it had increased to at least 75.
Wow.
His land was valued at $21,500 in 1850. That would probably be close to $1 million now. So I can understand tying Ellen to this family based on the location alone where she got married and thinking, oh, well, she's an Addison. She must belong to that family. However, as I said, I wasn't able to make that connection because I did go through Allen's will. Being that he had a large estate, he had a will, or at least he was going to have a probate. He had a will and he had the probate records were available for me to look through. The will named 3 children and 8 grandchildren. Not one was named Ellen Catherine. There was an Ellen Patience Addison, but she was only 5 years old at the time and not the right age. So unless Ellen was somehow disowned and thereby disinherited, she cannot be his daughter, despite what some trees try to claim. Mm-hmm. But again, I get why you might think it, but it's not the case. In 1850, I did find an Ellen Addison living with Henry and Mary Meats, along with Anne Addison, Elizabeth Addison, and Hampton Addison, who would be her siblings. And they were living in Lexington, South Carolina. Now, this is most likely the Ellen that married Elijah. And it's conceivable that Mary was married to an Addison prior to her marriage to Henry. And this was a remarriage due to death.
Oh.
But I've been unable to verify who the father was, much less any more information on Mary herself. So I'm kind of at an impasse on that one. But I do believe that her maiden name was Mary Russell. That's all I got. I will say that while not as well off as Allen Addison, Major Henry Meats did well for himself, being politically active in Lexington, South Carolina, as well as a lawyer who was also a slave owner, holding 13 in captivity in 1850 and 14 in 1860. I have no idea of their names because not all that was available. Ellen's mother, Mary, died in October 1860. From many reports, the marriage between Ellen and Elijah was rough. Elijah, or Lige, is that how you pronounce it?
I just made it up, so I'm sure I wasn't pronouncing it correctly.
Okay. I can't remember. I think it's Lige, but
that makes sense for Elijah.
Yeah. Worked for many years as a farmer or farm laborer in Edgefield County. And he also ended up developing a nickname called Ring-Eye Watson, or Ring-Eye Lige, or Lige Watson.
Tell us the story, Denise.
We'll get to the story. 10 months after Ellen and Lige married, Edgar was born. A daughter, Mary, called Minnie, as you mentioned, followed just over 2 years later. Lige was a mean and abusive husband and father. He followed the footsteps of those before him, enslaving 4 women and girls and 6 men and boys, 10 people to rule under his thumb. And that was in the 1860 census. I found that, the slave schedule that I found that. While I have no doubt he was a cruel slave master, I have to wonder if he was that way with his family at the start, or if something snapped during the Civil War. In December 1861, Lige enlisted in his brother Tillman's company of the 19th South Carolina Infantry Regiment as a sergeant. But 6 months was too long for him, or so it seemed. His unit fought at the Siege of Corinth in northern Mississippi, a month-long battle of the blue versus the gray, starting on April 29, 1862. Exactly 1 month later, the troops retreated, and I should say the Confederate troops retreated at nightfall, hoping not to be followed. Then on June 28, 1862, Lige appears on a consolidated list of deserters.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. The last place Lige had been seen was Tupelo, Mississippi, 50 miles south of Corinth. Now, from all the records I can find, I see no indication that he was a prisoner of war, although it's possible, but he did end up rejoining his unit at some point. After the regiment left Mississippi, they spent many months in Kentucky and Tennessee. Again, another report of Lige deserting happened in November 1862, the last time being seen at Tullahoma, Tennessee. So I wonder where he was going. Was he taking breaks? Getting captured and just not listed and then released? We may never know. By this time, though, his year was about up. Then, on July 15th, 1863, despite him disappearing, this is why I think it might have been legitimate reasons he disappeared. who knows? But he re-enlisted, this time as a private in the 6th South Carolina Cavalry, Aiken's regiment.
That's curious.
Yeah. Funny thing is, he didn't report straight for duty, though. In fact, he was absent for the rest of July and all of August when someone ordered him to report by September 1st. Then in December, Lige was granted a furlough to arrest a deserter. Yeah, I found that fascinating. On June 1st, 1864, Lige was detached by Major Green for the hospital. I found his final discharge in May 1865 as part of his unit's surrender to the Union. I did stumble on some records I'm not sure I fully grasp, because I've never seen these types of records before with my family or anybody else yet, but I thought they were really cool. And this is what I found. On December 30th, 1864, there's a copy of a promissory note from the Confederate States of America for $25 of old currency.
Wow.
Yeah, not probably worth very much. With a note that the new currency made it worth $14 when he cashed it.
Wow.
Yeah. This wasn't the only check I found. I found one for $315. New currency worth $210 when he cashed it from earlier that month. I kept going back. I found more payments, and it was under hired labor. Now, he's in the militia, so I'm finding that confusing. But I believe this was payment for his work as a soldier, maybe, because it does have references to Aiken's regiment. But I also wonder if his job became one of finding deserters for the regiment. After he got released that one time to do it, this became his regular job, and he got paid as he did it. As I went through more, I found when he was detached for the hospital, it was not because he was ill or injured. It was so he could work at the hospital in Columbia, South Carolina. And it seems like his job was for supply acquisition, because I saw a few notes where he's gathering food for the hospital. During that time when he wasn't enlisted, from December 1862 to July 1863, he was still probably working for the Confederate States of America in Texas, because I found a payment of $25 in August as a teamster driving a team from Brownsville, Texas to San Antonio.
Wow.
So it's likely that Lige was away for the whole of the war, or at least the vast majority, from his family.
Wow.
And after he returned home, he was referred to as quick to fight and a drunk. Now, I did find the first reference to Lige's behavior in the Intelligencer, a newspaper out of South Carolina, on December 16th, 1869. That said the following: when the afternoon performance of the circus was nearly over, a difficulty occurred under the canvas between two men, Frank Warren and Elijah Watson, in which the former struck the latter, so Frank hit Elijah, over the head with his own pistol, knocking him down but inflicting no injury.
Oh my God.
So apparently he got in a fight at the end of the circus?
Wow. I wonder what that was about.
Yeah, same here. Then 5 years later, in the Intelligencer, on September 24th, 1874, in a barroom fracas at Graniteville, South Carolina last Thursday night, Elijah Watson shot and killed Lawrence Wise.
Wow.
Then I found a better article that explained exactly what happened. And this is in a paper called The Daily Phoenix on September 20th, 1874. Homicide at Graniteville. Last Thursday evening, a difficulty occurred in A.P. Paget's barroom between Lawrence Wise and Elijah Watson, both white, resulting in the killing of the former by the latter. In the course of conversation, Watson cursed Wise, who thereupon told him not to say that again, as he would shoot him if he did. Watson repeated the opprobrious epithet when Wise drew a pistol and fired at him, but without effect. Wise then started down into the cellar when Watson pointed his pistol at him and fired. The ball struck Wise under the right arm and came out as far as the skin near his spine. Wise fell and was again fired at with a double-barreled shotgun by a man named Edgar Artemus, a friend of Watson. The shot, however, did not strike him. Wise died in about 20 minutes. Yesterday morning, Watson and Autry, the latter charged with being an accessory to the killing, were arrested and carried to Aiken. Watson, who is from Edgefield, is said to be a desperate character. He killed a man named Randall in Aiken about 8 years ago. Wise leaves a wife and 4 children. He was a gallant Confederate soldier and served throughout the struggle. So this was not the first man Elijah killed.
Wow. That's wild.
Yeah. And I could not find any newspaper articles on the man named Randall that he supposedly killed.
What is crazy to me is like the Watson men seem to get away with murder a lot.
They do. Now, his situation's a little bit different at the beginning because he came from a well-respected family. A well-respected family with a lot of money and power and influence.
Hello, true crime fans. This is Greg from Indie Drop-In. This episode is brought to you by Podbean. As you know, this podcast is all about supporting independent creators. I've worked with so many people who love true crime content, but also have the urge to contribute. You might want to amplify a victim's story or dig in the trenches to solve cold cases, but you'll need tools to get the message out. Podbean has the tools you need to host and distribute your podcast. There are even options to earn money from your podcast. You don't need any technical skills. There's no difficult technology to learn. The website is very, very easy. Because you listen to this show, Podbean is offering your first month for free by going to podbean.com/truecrime. That's podbean.com/truecrime. You can also use code TRUECRIME at checkout to get your first month free. Thank you so much for Podbean for supporting independent creators. To make it easy, look for a link in the show notes below.
So I think that helped him skate by.
Well, and I think too that, had the southern states not been assholes, then, they wouldn't have had to go through that whole let's take their property away from them thing, And and by property, I mean their land and such, and not like the humans, because the humans needed to be let go no matter what.
Right.
However, getting just a smidge of the politics at the time, the border states that didn't leave the Union were still allowed to have slaves.
Right.
So I'm just looking at this going, who does he blame for all of this? It's obviously not the Confederates, even though it's their fault his life went to crap. So it's like...
Yeah, and I also think for him, maybe when he was at war, he got a taste for the violence to a degree. Like, he might have been a cruel slave master. I'm assuming he probably was. So he already had that touch of violence in him. The war sets it off more, but now he's home and he doesn't have humans to abuse. That's considered acceptable abuse because they're not considered people to them, which is disgusting, but that's a whole different.
Did his wife stick with him through all this?
She was with him, I think, to this point. And that's what I was about to say. It's around this time that I believe Ellen found the courage to take her children and they headed for Florida. Now, I've seen some articles saying that she left in 1878, but I'm sure that's incorrect. I think this is when she left, at least between here and 1878. And I saw an article saying that she had family in Florida and that's where she went. But I wasn't able to find her on certain census records where I could see that she was with family. Like, I couldn't find her in the 1880 census.
Okay.
Which is very frustrating for me. But wait, there's more for Lige.
Oh my gosh.
So Ellen and the children have left. So this is a few years later, an hour before a man named McAvoy was supposed to be hung for murder. He decided it was time to tell his jailers who killed a man by the name of W.E. Sawyer Jr. in February 1874. And this is in 1878, by the way. So we're a few years down the line. So he's going to let them know what happened 4 years ago. Sawyer had been shot in the back of his head. And then the house was put on fire, burning down the house and leaving little of his body. His remains were pretty much gone by the fire. McAvoy told his jailers that the man responsible was Solomon Altman. Altman, in turn, said he had nothing to do with the murder, but he knew who did. Milton Watson and his first cousin, Elijah Daniel Watson, Edgar's father.
Wow.
Now, both Watsons were arrested, but they denied the crime. All three were tried in July 1878. Altman was found guilty of manslaughter with sentencing recommendation of mercy, and the Watsons were all found not guilty.
Wow.
Now, ultimately, the judge sent Altman to prison for life, even though it was a manslaughter with mercy recommendation. He did appeal it, and his sentence he was resentenced in 1885 to 23 years. Now, what I do find interesting are all the stories that Lige was a penitentiary warden. So you see these articles and they're all saying he was a jail warden.
Mm-hmm.
Yet I found nothing to support that. Not one newspaper article said that he was, not the census. In fact, in every census, he was listed as a farmer.
Interesting.
Or a farm laborer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it could be he did have a job there at some point, but I don't believe it was consistent at any level.
Wow.
Elijah would die at age 64 in South Carolina in June 1897, alone. Now, not too long after Ellen Watson and her family left, they settled at Fort White, Florida. And like I said, I think this was between 1874 and 1878, the latest probably being 1877. And it was in Fort White that her daughter Minnie met, then married William H.C. Collins in April 1878. They would have at least 3 children, Julian, Edgar, William, and Mary. The couple would die fairly young, William at 58 in 1907 and Minnie at 54 in 1912. Edgar married just 7 months after his sister did to Anne Mary Collins, but she went by the name Charlie.
Interesting.
And yes, I heard that little gasp. She was the sister of William Collins, husband to Edgar's sister, Minnie. The marriage would only last 10 months, as Charlie died in September 1879. I have no idea the cause. In January 1882, Edgar married again, this time to Jane Deal. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's Dyall. They would have 4 children together. In fact, when Belle Starr was killed, Jane was only 1 month pregnant with her youngest, Lucius.
Wow.
And whether or not she knew she was pregnant, we'd have to ask her, but she's not available. Oh, and before I forget, I have a postmaster alert, sort of.
Oh, I like that.
It's peripheral. Charlie, Edgar's first wife, her father had been a postmaster.
Oh, that's why that all turned out okay.
Okay, so by 1900, Edgar and Jane no longer lived together, but I don't believe they ever actually divorced.
Okay.
Now, in the book Bone by Bone by Peter Mathiasson, it's part of a fictionalized 3-part series or trilogy about Edgar. Bloody Ed had 2 common-law wives while he and Jane were separated. First to Henrietta Daniels, then Mary Josephine or Josie Jenkins. And each of these women supposedly had his children. Of course, I found that today, that information, and I set out to verify it. And we'll get there a little bit later. Let's just leave you hanging for a minute. Because we're going to start by discussing the children of Jane and Edgar. And their first child was Robert Walker Watson, born in October 1882 in DeLand, Florida. Now, Peter Mathiasson lists a Robert Briggs Watson as the son of Edgar and his first wife, Charlie, born in 1879. At the beginning of his book, he has like a little thing about his family tree, just so you can kind of see who gets talked about, I guess. I haven't read the book. So as far as I can tell, if this is true, then that Robert likely died before 1880 because Edgar in the 1880 census lived on his own. With I think he was boarding with somebody and working as a farm laborer. And I couldn't find a Robert Watson near him with any family members at that time. So it's unlikely. I believe it was a mistake that Mathiasson made because he lists Edgar and Jane as only having 3 children. And like I said, they had 4. And the child that's missing between Edgar and Jane is Robert. So I think there was a little confusion there. Robert had his birthday listed as 1881 at one point and 1882 at a couple other points. I believe it was 1882.
Okay.
Robert was on his own by 1900, though I'm not sure where. Possibly Chicago. I have little hints of this. In 1910, though, I know he left the United States, immigrating to Alberta, Canada. 3 years later, he married another immigrant, this one from London, England, Mary Elizabeth Johnson. They would have 3 daughters and 1 son before divorcing around 1935. Robert worked as a hotel manager and made a brief return to the United States by 1940, living and working in Chicago. But ultimately, he would return to Canada, specifically Victoria, British Columbia, where he died in 1978 at the age of 95.
Oh, wow. Well, that's a beautiful place to live.
Yes, and he never had any other contact with his siblings, I don't believe. It's like he disappeared from their lives, and it could be because of his dad, which wouldn't surprise me. because even on some of his siblings on their obituaries, and they say this person has these siblings still living, he's never mentioned again.
Wow.
So,
wow.
Now, their daughter Caroline, or Carrie, was born in 1885. So it was surprising for me to find her getting married at age 14 in July 1899 to 26-year-old Walter Galloway Langford in Fort Myers.
Ew.
Yeah. And actually, there's some people that say that she was 13.
Oh, my God.
But I found the marriage record, so I'm pretty sure she was 14. But yeah, not cool. Now, anytime the census asked how old she was, she always lied and said 15.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. So it makes me think that the marriage might have been prompted to get away from her dad. Another way, it was an escape hatch. Now, I'm not saying that he had no contact with her. I think there was potentially, but she wanted out of his house. And that was a good way to do it.
True. But was it the frying pan into the fire?
I don't know. I don't think it was. Because the life she got on the surface sounds like it was a good life. And I'll explain. Walter provided very well for his family. He was a banker in Fort Myers and did well enough to employ a cook to work and live in their home, as well as someone to manage the estate. So he had some money. And he wasn't just someone who worked at the bank. Oh, no. He actually organized the first national bank in Fort Myers in 1907.
Oh.
He was 34 when he did that.
And he married the daughter of an outlaw.
Yes.
That's crazy. Wow.
But they got married before it got really known what an outlaw his father-in-law was. So there's that. And he served as the president of the bank. Now, the bank doesn't exist anymore, but I did do a quick mini dive into the bank, and I learned something kind of fascinating. I might have to provide a link so people can go and look if I can find it again. But apparently there was a time where banks printed their own money.
I did not know that.
Well, at least this bank did for like a number of years. They printed their own U.S. currency.
Really?
Yes.
I mean, I knew that they did things like promissory notes and stuff.
Nope. This
and
was
bank notes,
this was U.S. currency. And apparently, if you're a collector and you get the money that got printed from this bank, it's worth a lot.
Interesting.
Yeah. I found that really cool. Now, sadly, Walter didn't live a long life. He died of apoplexy in November 1920 at the age of 47.
Oh.
Yeah. He did not leave his large estate to his wife or children. Not exactly. Instead, he put it all in a trust at his death, giving them payments decided upon by who was handling the trust. On regular payments, I think he phrased it in his will. And then, hold on. And he also made sure to say, make sure my children get their education that they need and those types of things. So Carrie never remarried again. And she lived to the ripe old age of 76. But she also didn't sit back idly living in the wealth after Walter died. I mean, she had enough to care for her for several years. I don't know if it was long enough for the rest of her life, but she was 36 at his death, or 35, I should say. So that's a long time and probably not enough. But instead, she invested her money in restaurants around Fort Myers, as well as a beach hotel.
Good on her.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And I did see an ad that I'll place on the website. It's for she had a casino as well.
Oh, that's fun.
So she was a businesswoman.
Say smart girl.
Yeah. But that isn't to say she didn't run across a few bumps along the way. I found the following article in the News Press. This is out of Fort Myers on November 25th, 1935. Beach blaze burns Langford Place at Fort Myers Beach. Fire of undetermined origin early this morning destroyed Mrs. Carrie Langford's store, dining room, and living quarters at Fort Myers Beach. The fire department was summoned from Fort Myers, but when they arrived at 2 o'clock this morning, the Langford establishment was a blazing mass of ruins. Mrs. Langford, Mr. and Mrs. Ed Flights, that's her daughter and son-in-law, and their children had retired and barely escaped from the blazing building. Their efforts to throw water on the fire, which spread rapidly to the two connected buildings, were futile, and nothing was saved except 2 small boxes of groceries. The loss was estimated by Mr. Flights as close to $7,500. Yeah. The new dining room was not quite completed, and there was no insurance on the 2 connected buildings.
Oh, my.
Yeah. And there's a reason for this I'm coming to. Beach residents were awakened by the blaze, but could do little except to prevent it from spreading to nearby buildings. It was the second major loss for Mrs. Langford within 3 months. In September, a tropical hurricane wrecked her beach casino. The place she had built was to replace the beachfront establishment, which has since been converted into a small hotel by Baron Collier of Fort Myers. Now, she did end up rebuilding some restaurant. She was always busy doing that.
Wow. But seriously, though, what a sharp gal.
Yeah, she was very on top of it. To say the family was wealthy, though, before his death seems like an understatement, because the newspaper was quick to report on the sale of their first home and the building of a new home in 1919. Like it made the front page, the building of the new home, because it was just completed and they had a picture of the house and described everything in detail on the interior of it. Now, of course, this is 1919. They were only in the house for a year before he died.
Oh, my.
And then it had to be sold after his death as part of the estate. So let's get back to Edgar's children. So he had a son named Edgar as well, Edgar Elijah. And he did well and lived a normal life where he worked as an insurance agent. He married, had 3 children, and died in Fort Myers at the age of 87. Their last son and last child, this is between Jane and Edgar, was Lucius Hampton, or Colonel, as he was called apparently, and he was born in 1889. And I've got to be honest, Lucius is a little confusing, and I'm not quite sure Hampton was his actual middle name. So I saw that on Find a Grave, but I'm not convinced. So either he changed his middle name, or there were 2 Lucius H. Watsons born in Florida or Arkansas in 1889 on the same day. One had having the middle name Hardy and the other with the middle name Hampton. Or Lucius was a bit of a wild card. I'm going to go with a wild card on this, though.
Yeah.
So I find him marrying a Scottish immigrant by the name of Greta Chambers Welch in 1926 in Florida. Now, this marriage was happening on the heels, literally a day or so after his divorce to Frances O'Meara.
Oh, my.
Yeah, a woman he married in New York City in 1916.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. And then not only that, he was a really bad husband to Frances, because in 1920, I found an article where he was arrested for non-support.
Oh, the asshole.
Yeah, he was not a good guy. And even then, in 1920, she's living in Miami in a home working, or somewhere working as a servant.
Oh, wow.
So she was doing what she could to make do, but he was not there. Now, I guess after he served his time in the U.S. Navy during World War I, he must not have returned to her in their home in Florida at all. I can't help but wonder if Greta knew about his married state before she married him. It may have tipped her off on what was to come for her.
Mm.
So the couple moved to New York, he and Greta, and they had 2 children, David Hardy Watson and Greta Watson. By 1940, and I should say this, his wife Greta was a nickname for her name, Margaret.
Ah.
So I find in 1940, Greta is on her own with the children living in Brooklyn. He's living in Florida again, a fisherman. She's listed as married. He's listed as single.
Oh, my.
Not even divorced, not even widowed, nothing indicating that he was ever married. Lucius married at least once more to Nancy Roberts, a divorcee in 1956.
Wow.
They actually remained married until his death at age 80 in 1970.
Wow. So he just got worn out.
Yeah, and he, I think, tended to take a little bit more after his father.
Wow.
And we'll get to that. So let's get to these mistresses and talk about them. Now, Mathiasen called them common law wives, but that would have to mean that he divorced Jane to even be common law anything, and I don't think they ever divorced. So it's more than likely these were just women he saw as disposable as well. He didn't spend a long time with either one of them. So again, I don't see that as a common law wife. It was a fling. It was a mistress. It was...
Well, and whether or not they knew, whether or not the women knew they weren't really his wife is another thing too.
Yeah. Well, I don't think they ever thought they married him either. And
well, I was going to say, to be a common law wife, you have to be telling people this is your wife. And they have to intend for it to be an actual marriage.
Okay.
And they have to be able to be married. And And even then, some states don't even recognize common law marriage anyway. In fact, most don't anymore. But yeah, he's just created all kinds of mess there.
Yeah. So I'm going to do this a little out of order, and it'll make sense why I'm doing this in a minute.
Okay, I'm braced.
We'll start with his second fling, Josephine Jenkins. Now, Mathiasen did get their ages wrong on this. He thought they were a little younger than they were. I'm sure that's because he had a hard time finding the paper trail for these women. Mm-hmm. It took me a few hours. So much for making this a really mini-sode. But I found her. And that made me so excited.
Congratulations.
You should hear me in here. My husband was working from home today. I'm like, I'm so good. And he's like, okay. So Josephine was born in December 1869, likely in Key West. This was a woman who had several children by different husbands. She was married at least 5 times.
Wow.
Or should I say at least 4 official marriages, starting with Caleb Parks in 1883 when she was only 14.
Oh my gosh. Now, did she know how to make arsenic? Is that how she had so many husbands?
I don't think so, but you never know. Honestly.
Just saying, 5 husbands, that's a lot.
Because her next husband was Joseph Williams. Then she had her relationship with Edgar, followed by a Mr. Hardin. I could never find his first name. I just know there was a Hardin because she had children with the last name Hardin. And finally, Joseph Addison. Her daughter with Edgar was Madeline Pearl Watson, and she was born in April 1895. That's a date actually Mathiasen got right. She thought that she was born in 1895. Spot on. Pearl also married several times. First to William Keene in 1915, but the marriage ended before 1920 when she married J. Earl Helveston. They were married until 1931. Then she married a Doyle James Sims in 1944. They divorced in 1945. I have no idea what happened to her next. The paper trail ended from my end at that point. But I suspect she got married again, and that's why I can't find her. And also, there's no 1950 census out yet, so it's harder to track.
Oh, yeah, fair point there.
But that's coming out next year, so. Okay, so as I was researching Josephine, I stumbled on Edgar's first fling with Henrietta Daniels, when I noticed a Henrietta living with Josephine and her family in the 1885 Florida State Census in Key West.
Huh.
I'm anticipating going, how curious. I'm like, yeah, very. It turns out that Henrietta was the stepsister, or maybe even half-sister, of Josephine, because Henrietta's mom married Josephine's father.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
If Josephine's mom, I believe that Josephine's mom, I believe they shared a mother, basically. And her mom had been married to a Daniels before Henrietta. Henrietta, or Nettie, was born in 1866. In 1885, she was a widow. When I found her next, she was marrying Uriah James Sands in Key West in 1887. But by 1900, Nettie was boarding at the home of George Rowe, along with her 4 children. 2 by her first husband, the last name was Thompson, and 2 by Uriah James Sands. Maybe. So, here's the thing. The girls with the last name Sands, she claimed them to be Uriah's. Uriah was born in the Bahamas. She said their father was born in the Bahamas. So it kind of fits there. But according to Mathiasen, the youngest daughter, Minnie, was the daughter of Edgar.
Oh.
And this seems likely, given that her sister Mary kept her maiden name as Sands after her mom remarried to their landlord, George Rowe.
As one does.
But Minnie took George's last name.
Oh.
And she became known as Minnie Rowe.
Okay.
Nettie would die in Key West in 1938. Minnie spent her life in Key West. She married Wilbert Knowles at age 15, had 3 children. They were married for 50 years when he died in 1960, and she followed in 1977.
Oh my! Now, how old was he when they got married?
Give me a quick second to double. I'm not sure. I didn't even write it down. I was like writing notes left and right, but I didn't write that down.
Just curious. I mean, they had to be fairly close in age if he lived that much longer.
Yeah. Well, no, she lived longer.
Well, no, but after the marriage.
Yeah. I want to say he was probably no more than 20. He wasn't. It would have caught my attention. I would have written it down had it been a huge age gap or something. Yeah. Now, let's go back to Edgar and his third wife, because yes, he married a third time, Edna Catherine Bethia, in 1905. This was 4 years after Jane died. So Jane died in 1901 in Fort Myers, or at least, I don't know if she died in Fort Myers, but I know she was buried in Fort Myers. Now, in the 5 years they were married, they would have 2 children, Ruby Helen Watson and Hampton Watson. After Edgar's death, Edna married Mortimer Burkett in December 1911 at Fort Walton, Florida. So she left the whole area they had been living in. She went as close to the north of Florida as she could almost get, but while staying close to the beach. So Mortimer would adopt the children, and they took his last name. So they were no longer Watsons. And that's the family tree of Edgar Artemus Watson. Or is it Edgar J? We'll never know.
Wow.
Now, I do have a few little notes before we finish off completely. All of Artemis's slaves at his death are listed in his probate record, or at least the settling of his will, along with their monetary value that they ranked him at. Ugh, I just hate saying that about people. The names and any other info will be on the website, and there's a lot of names. I want to say there's over 80. Artemis had over 80 slaves at that point. The total number they came up with for all the enslaved children, men and women, came to a value of $22,625. In today's numbers, that would be around $700,000. I also plan on seeing if I can find out what happened to these priceless human beings. No guarantees, but we shall see. Because I do suspect this is a family where raping of the women was probably commonplace. And there's probably some more Watsons. I wish I could get the names of Edgar's, the people that he enslaved, but that doesn't seem likely. But I might have one or two, because there is a resource that I found, the Edgefield County, South Carolina slave records, and it has a list of sales, so you can see where one person went to the next. So hopefully that could be useful to somebody who needs that information, and I'll have as much of that as I can up on the website. So if you're looking for an ancestor and your last name was Watson, hopefully that can help you out.
Well, gosh, you have taken on quite a ride today, Denise.
This was a family.
Yes, it was. I'm actually really pleased to hear that for the most part, the children all turned out okay.
Yeah. It was just that one son in particular, but I think it's because he probably lived with his father even longer than the other siblings. Whereas, the oldest son got out of town as fast as he could and never looked back. His daughter got married and was there, and I'm sure there was some sort of relationship, and I'm sure he was hitting up his son-in-law for money. It wouldn't surprise me if that were true. Yeah, but he was kind of stuck there, and he stuck with his family. I mean, so I imagine that got to his head. And then he went and served in the U.S. Navy during World War I. So
Lucius.
Yeah. So it just probably combined elements just made things rough.
Curiously, so while you were talking about Lucius, I'm like, this man sounds fascinating. And his obituary, it's really easy to find. It's one of the first things that popped up. And it didn't say who his parents were.
Oh.
And I was like, I'm like, usually they put who the parents are.
I forgot that they didn't do that. But sometimes you find that in some of the older obituaries. It really depends. Carrie's obituary references her parents, but doesn't say their names. Like, she came from a South Florida pioneers to the area, but they don't say the names. So very similarly distancing from who that was. And I also wonder if Lucius's wife, his third or fourth, whatever wife she was, knew who he came from.
Right.
Or if he even shared that at that point. That's got to be hard on the kids.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
And I'm sure he was abusive.
Yeah.
I mean,
I would not be shocked.
I mean, he could be charming from all I read when he wanted to be. But when you're at home and you let your guard down, yeah. So this was fun.
This was fun. Thank you so much for this excellent roller coaster ride. And listeners, thanks for listening and hope you have a great week. And we will see you all later.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Murderous Roots. If you enjoyed our podcast, we hope that you'll subscribe and leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you and any suggestions you might have for future episodes. You can find us on most social media outlets like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and even TikTok. You can also find us at murderousroots.com. That's MurderousRoots.com, where you can find more materials related to the episode that we just discussed.
Thanks again for listening to True Crime by Indie Drop-In. If you would like your show featured, reach out to us at Indie Drop-In on all social media or go to indiedropin.com. See you next time.